Yeah, I'm a scientist who I was going to go be a teacher somewhere when Fred Hutch said, "Hey, you know the science, you know how to teach the science. Why don't you stay here and talk about the science?" So I decided to do that, and it was for a nerd with ADHD like me,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
perfect.
That's a
Greatest job in the world because I get to hear about all the great science that's going on at the Hutch, which is a really phenomenal place to be.
PR Pika, don't you? Or
Fair
PR
enough.
Indeed,
Aloha.
That's
It's
sounds
been
a
a long day.
perfection.
I think
All right,
we can start
let's
with the
see.
interview
Reading back some of
now.
my questions here. One thing
PR Pika,
I
don't
put
you?
this
Or
question in out of my own curiosity is have
PR
you
Aloha. It's
participated
been a
in or
long
been
day.
part of a been a
All
donor
right,
to a
let's
gaming
see.
oriented
Read back
charity
some of
event
my
like
questions here.
this in the past?
One thing I put this question in out of my own curiosity is have you participated in or been part of a been a donor to a gaming oriented charity event like this in the past?
Actually, yes. There have been a couple of gamers who have hosted Twitch games or games on Facebook Gaming who have had me on to come talk about their research
Wow. Yeah, that
or the
Oh
research
wow.
going on at Fred Hutch.
yeah, do you
So,
think
yeah,
that's something that is
I wouldn't
becoming
say I'm
more
an old
common
hand, but I
nowadays?
am not an absolute
Just it
novice either.
seems like even like GDQs and smaller streams are
Wow.
now
In
Yeah,
actually
experience.
making this become
yeah.
a
Do you
more
think
regular and common
that's something
thing.
that is becoming more common nowadays? Just it seems like even like GDQs and smaller streams are now actually making this become a more regular and common thing.
I mean, it should, right? Like, this is the reach of things like this is so much greater. I mean, there are more subscribers to Twitch than Netflix, so it just
You're
makes a
welcome to.
lot more sense to get good information out and to have people like you that want to get good information out. And so, thank you.
Yes.
We are
But
very welcome to.
we're glad. Indeed, and that's the whole thing. That's really great. Is that right now with this interview, right now we can really have this reach, to help all of us being more informed, especially in this period. So, since basically, what can you tell us about how, like you and Fred Hutch and everything, how all of it really has responded overall to the pandemic? Or I suppose actually before that, generally speaking, even before the pandemic, what is usually Fred Hutch focused on for those that are not aware of what Fred Hutch is?
Yeah,
And then, yeah.
yeah, that's a that's a really great question. Yeah, Fred Hutch is we're a cancer center up in Seattle, and we're the comprehensive cancer center for the Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. So for those states, and so we have a hospital, we do cancer research, and we do have a phenomenal basic research department as well. And so we became famous for a treatment called bone marrow transplant, which is a way of treating many blood cancers. And from that, we've become leaders in the field of immunotherapy. But what people don't really realize is that treating cancer patients, what we discovered was during treatment, they were especially vulnerable to viruses, like something called cytomegalovirus. And so we brought on specialists to start studying viruses. And it just grew and grew. And now almost 30% of our research was already virus focused. So when the pandemic started, it's not like we had to pivot our research. We were already there. We just plugged in a different virus. We went from studying flu and actually the old coronaviruses to studying this coronavirus. So we had the tools. And in fact, one of our researchers, Trevor Bedford, using his tool NextTrain, was the first to alert people that
Wow.
the virus may be spreading within the public in
That's
the United States and
incredible.
urged leaders in Washington
That's stuff I
state to
really
take
wish we get more
social
out
distancing
into
guidelines.
the general public for programs like
Oh
this.
wow.
One question I think would really follow into this pretty
That's
nicely is
incredible. That's
I hear that the
that's stuff I
NextTrain
really wish
initiative
we get more
is
out
open
into
sourced.
the
Does
general
that at all
public
create an
for programs like
impact
this.
on research
One
at
question
all?
I
And if
think
it
would really
does,
follow into this
how,
pretty
if
nicely
at all?
is I hear that the Next Strain initiative is open sourced. Does that at all create an impact on research at all? And if it does, how, if at all?
Yeah, fantastic question, right? Like so what NextTrain is this um, is this tool that Trevor Bedford developed along with researchers at the University of Basel. So we start out already multiple different countries. And what it does is it takes genetic sequences, so people who are looking at the virus and trying to understand what makes up each of the coronaviruses in different people and comparing how they are different. They can basically build a family tree and say, oh, you probably got the virus from this person because your coronavirus looks very similar to this person's. But this other person probably got it from somewhere else. So
Oh.
that way they can estimate how many different strains are moving through the population at any given time, and that can inform public health. But what the gap there is that we need places to sequence the coronavirus and put it up on open source. And the world has responded phenomenally. They recognize the utility of this tool, and people are taking genome sequences, putting it on NextTrain, and we can analyze the data faster. Trevor Bedford, who I would recommend people follow on Twitter, his handle is at TRVRB, is a phenomenal follow. And what he's doing, he's not trying to save all the data to publish in the way that science used to be. He's looking at the data, analyzing it in real time, and putting it out into the world because he recognizes the need for it right now.
Yeah, I guess right now it really be about being able to help spread the information that's being learned as fast as possible. Would it be?
Absolutely, and that the world has come together to do open science in a way that we have never seen before. People are collaborating across cities, across states, across countries, and that's what we need for something that is as global as this pandemic.
Absolutely, and that comment brings to mind, since it is open sourced. I guess another thing I should have thought about is folding at home, like that. That in and of itself, right there, is been immensely helpful, considering the power of all of that, of people lending their own machines to effectively help do that sequencing and do some of the extra mathematics that's required to map out some of these models is super helpful. So I imagine open sourcing it like that, at least in the instance
Yeah, I
for
mean,
folding at home, it's incredible.
yeah, and the other piece is also right. Like they're looking, Trevor and his group are looking for certain things, but there may be other people who want to analyze the data slightly differently and get different conclusions. You know, and one of the things that was was a question was how the virus had been spreading in Washington State, the state where I live currently. And Trevor had an analysis which people thought made sense at the time. But other researchers looked at the data as it accumulated and analyzed it slightly differently and came up with a different timeline for how the virus was spreading. And that's what's really important. Science is not about being right and being first. Sorry, it's not about there being only one answer. As we get more data, people can analyze and reanalyze and try and find the right answer.
Gotcha. That's very fascinating. Wow. Pika, you want to take a crack at the next question?
Okay, do you hear me? I just had a brief internet disconnection. Sorry about that.
You're fine, no worries.
Okay, good. I got really scared for a minute. But yeah, when I see projects like Next Train and the nature of how it's changing research just for this particular pandemic, I keep wondering. First off, is it something that's gonna do you think it's gonna impact also how it's gonna be in the future in terms of research on viruses and such? Even for the future and not just this particular pandemic, or do you think it might come back closer to how it originally is? Because seeing how quickly, indeed, as you were saying, how the world banded together to research is really fascinating to think about, really.
Yeah, and that's a really phenomenal point, and definitely something that's worth thinking about. And personally, I think there's a lot of benefit to to being connected and doing that, sharing data like that in the future. And I think that's the way we need to go. But there's other aspects of society that need to adapt to that as well. And sort of what I mean by
Yes.
that is when the data gets shared publicly, it could be wrong, it could be right. So normally what science happens when science is somebody finds data, puts forward their assessment, and it gets reviewed by other scientists, and then they say, yes, this is good, we can send this up, or I don't agree, maybe this is overstated. So that sort of peer review has gone away in this time, and that's fine. But what is happening is that a lot of media outlets are finding controversial papers that will be clickbait that have not been peer reviewed and then putting them up into the world. And science
Yeah.
science is iterative. People have to look at it and assess it and try and decide, oh, I think this is right, I think this is wrong, or this is a good assessment. And if that's not happening and the media sees this catchy headline and puts it out there, it can be a little dangerous, and has been actually, because I'm sure some of you saw the news about, oh, there's strains of coronaviruses that are more deadly than others. There's 8 strains, 9 strains, and that's not true. So there are places where people have to adapt to the way science works, and then this sort of open sharing would be great, and I think it is the way we should go.
Now, I got a question from Floha in chat, and this one actually relates to the answer you just gave. Is he wants to know, there have been multiple coronaviruses in the past from, of course, different methods and transmissions. So why is this particular coronavirus affecting us so much? What makes COVID-19 different from the rest?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as Flora is saying, so there are 4 coronaviruses that normally circulate within the human populations. It causes about 20% of the common colds, and it causes a disease in kids called croup, which is like a barking cough, and one of them causes some sort of pneumonia. So these are present. Our body has fought these 4 coronaviruses for I actually don't know how long, but that's called endemic. These are strains that exist in the human population and just move between humans and change slightly. So back in 2003, a coronavirus jumped from bats to humans, and that was called SARS. And then in 2012 or 13, another coronavirus jumped from camels to humans called MERS. And these two, along with this coronavirus, which is SARS-CoV-2, so yeah, actually, the naming convention, it's COVID-19 because the year it was discovered was 2019. There's not been 19 of them, just to dispel that myth over there. But the original SARS, MERS, and this coronavirus jumped more recently, and they're all a lot more similar. And we can learn from why those didn't take off and this did. And a couple of the things that we can learn is the original SARS and MERS, people weren't really infectious or able to spread the virus until they were really sick. So imagine if you're feeling crummy, you're not going to go outside. And so you aren't likely to spread the virus. Or you get really sick, you go to the hospital, and as long as the nurses and doctors are wearing protective equipment, the virus can't spread from person to person. And that's what, if you looked at the people who got infected in 2003 and 2012, it was mostly medical people. Because people got sick, went to the hospital, and then it went spread amongst medical people. What is unique about this one is people can spread the virus before they show symptoms. And that is the major source of the virus spreading amongst populations. And that's what's made this so tricky.
That's interesting to hear about, actually. And something you mentioned a bit earlier is, you often talk about, for instance, misconceptions and, for instance, myths of it that surround it. For instance, earlier we were just talking about, as a simple one, saying, for instance, oh, COVID-19, it's not because it's a 19th strain, but it's because it was found in the year 2019. That's a simple one, but a lot earlier you were also talking about how, for instance, clickbait media would sometimes use misinformation to try and generate clicks. So I think the question that I'd like to ask is really about misinformation about the virus, the pandemic. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that we really need to be aware of? And what do you think we need to do in order to really protect ourselves from that? Really, do you think?
Yeah, so
Because that seems to be quite a common topic.
yeah, this is a really great question, and because this gives me a chance to start and think about the biggest misconceptions. And you know, so yeah, one was the year that there's not been 18 other coronaviruses, and this is the 19th. Another one is that that's that's been fairly controversial is the need to wear masks, and it shouldn't be that controversial because the data really suggests that if 80% of the population wore masks that were even 60% effective, we could stop this virus in its tracks. We could go about normal life mostly without it spreading quite as much. Um, so that's another one. So people, if you can make a cloth mask or some sort of mask, I definitely recommend it. It'll protect you from the virus somewhat, but more than that, if you have the virus, it will protect other people from you passing the virus on to them. That's the major function of it.
Yes.
Yes.
The other piece is, what are the other big misconceptions that I'm missing here? So the fact that there are 8 of different strengths of the virus, that as far as we know, as far as the data suggests, so it's just a difference in shorthand between what the epidemiologists do and sort of the virologists do. And so what Trevor does and what a lot of epidemiologists do is they look at the virus and look at how the virus is changing as it moves through people. And the changes are pretty random. And so every time there's a change that they see present in multiple people, they call it a new strain of the virus. But it doesn't mean that it does something new or does something different. It's just a way to distinguish one from the other from the other.
Gotcha.
So strains don't mean that they are more toxic. Those tests haven't been done, and there's only one change that people are seeing that could potentially be not that much worse than the first one, but it's really hard to tell without doing the tests.
I do agree. And before we continue, I did want to say something to our Twitch chat viewers here. We do have a set of listed questions, but please do feel free to ask any questions you may have as a viewer. We are definitely wanting to open this up for anybody who may have a question, and we will get those answered right away. We will be reading chat, and we'll be happy to ask Guppy here whatever questions you may have. So please go ahead and post it. We encourage it.
And in fact, there's already a question that is here in the chat. May we ask it?
Please, of course. It's welcome.
All right, so we've got Stacy asking, they say that the vaccine might be developed somewhere around 2021. How realistic is that given the information about the virus we know now and the research we've done so far?
That is a phenomenal question. And, I want to preface this by saying that, yes, that it could be 2021. But the record for for us building a vaccine is 4 years. Agreed, that was a long time ago, and we have a lot more technology now. And so we're really optimistic now that we could have something by 2021. And so what I think I was reading the literature the other day, and at last count, there was probably over 100 different vaccines that were being tested. And right now, all we need is one that works, and I'm sure it will get better. It may not be perfect. It may offer some protection, but we're just taking as many shots on goal as possible. Right now, we just have to try everything that we can with it. And that's what's been heartening to see, is that a lot of places aren't saying, oh, they're developing a vaccine, so we won't do it because there's no monetary sense. Everybody's taking a shot and everybody's trying a different way to get the vaccine. And But once we do have that, the next important piece is trying to test the vaccine across a broad range of populations and making sure that there's proper representation amongst people who the vaccine gets tested on. You want to test it on people that are white, on people that are black, on people that are Indian, on people that are Chinese. You want to make sure the vaccine works for all of them. And in that sense, one of the things that people don't appreciate about Fred Hutch is actually we're the coordinating center for vaccine trials for HIV. So people all develop vaccines, it comes to us, and we go to places where the diseases are and test those vaccines out. And so we're going to put that to use to the rest of the world to test these vaccines as they're developed.
Wow.
And I'll just add on one more thing. Yes, it was 4 years. Technology has moved so much faster that we're trying so many new ways to get a vaccine this time that I am hopeful that it will be quicker than 4 years. But part of it is also we have to test the safety. That you're putting something into somebody's body, you need to wait a certain amount of time to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And that's our limitation. Is just we have to wait and see what happens in people.
Yeah, you basically don't want to rush it too much,
right?
Because you need to be sure that indeed it does work really well. But it's also really nice to hear that a general hopeful tone about it, despite everything.
I think it's been so hopeful to see the scientific community coming together and trying all of these different ways together. That for once we're not competing against each other; we're competing with each other, and that is phenomenal and hopeful.
What I guess this kind of goes hand in hand with the potential misconceptions, but is there actually any one particular potential vaccine in the testing stage that is actually making ground on coming to the public at all, or is there one that is really close to potentially being live tested or made any progress? I hear that since there is potentially multiple vaccines being researched and tested, is there any particular one that might be potentially showing signs of actually coming forth?
Right. So that's a interesting question, and I'm going to answer to the best of my abilities because there's only so much I know about how far vaccine trials are moving. A lot of them they can't disclose as much information. But what I can gather is that there's been a few that have been really successful. There's been one that's really successful in the UK, and there's been one that's actually really been successful in Seattle, and they use different technologies. And there may be one or two others that have advanced. So there's different stages to testing a vaccine. The first one is you test how much you can give a person safely without them showing adverse effects, and that's called phase one. It's a dose escalation. So a lot of them have gone past that stage of knowing how much do we have to give them that is safe. The next thing is looking at safety and efficacy, and so those trials I believe are currently ongoing, and people are hopeful that we will have it at a stage in the fall that it can, if need be, it could be given to frontline workers as like a last resort of here's an untested vaccine. It sort of seems to work. It'll offer you some protection, maybe, but it won't be available to the general public probably until 2021.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense because we don't want to. I would assume researchers and doctors don't want to go hand out a vaccine that has a 50-50 chance. They don't want to give odds like that to the
No.
general
Yeah,
public.
no.
Maybe with the doctors who are on the front line with an emergency, maybe, but to the rest of the people that would not be ideal.
Yeah.
So that
And
makes a lot of sense.
And the thing you have to consider is people are healthy. When you're giving them a vaccine, you want them to stay healthy. You don't want them to develop other effects that we haven't thought about yet. Because as hard as we try and as hard as we think about it, animals are not humans. So testing in animals is close but not exactly right. So we have to test what happens in people and know that the vaccine isn't going to cause some other side effects.
Speaking of side effects and potential consequences, Fanciful Unicorn from chat asks, "Quote: Is there going to be a resurgence for those states that are opening now, or do you think there might be?"
Honestly, fanciful unicorn, I could not tell you. I think it's about risk, right? Like it's about knowing the numbers of people in that state that likely have the virus as they're opening up, and it's a combination of how many people are infected versus how much testing they have to see who is infected, and the ability to trace and isolate those people, not only the people that are infected, but the people they've been in contact with. And so it just depends on how well set up that public health is to do that. Um, my best guess is some places are taking on more risk than they should.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Pika, would you like to let or tell Guppy about the next chat question that came through from Rubicon?
Absolutely. So yeah, indeed, we've also got a question from Rubicon asking, there are a lot of other viruses we don't have a vaccine for. So what other things are we going to do to get life back to normal?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. And I think, while we wait for the vaccine, the other thing we have to think about is treatments. One of the reasons why we go out like normal during flu season, which is also pretty deadly sometimes, is because we have a drug and we have treatments and our body's immune system has seen it. So can we find
Yes.
those sort of drugs and treatments that will shorten the time that we have this virus or will make the reaction to the virus less severe? And if we can find those, then we can start going back to normal. It would just be like, so I had the flu in January actually. And I went to the doctors, they gave me this drug called Tamiflu, which is sort of effective, but it reduces the time that the virus can be in your body. And if we can get something like that for this coronavirus, and you match that with testing and tracing, imagine that you came down with the virus, Pika, and people came, they gave you a drug, they said, who did you meet in the last 5 days? We'll just send them a drug that can shorten the lifetime of this virus. And then they may get sick, but they won't get as sick. Right now, we've tested drugs only for people that are really critically ill. And the next phase is to test drugs early and try and treat people early in the phase so they don't get as sick. And that,
Gotcha.
I think,
So-
will be crucial. And actually, on those lines, Fred Hutch is opening a COVID research center where we are going to try and roll out some of these trials, where we will enroll people to test some of these early intervention strategies.
Yeah, I agree with Stacy in chat. Even says that does sound very promising, and that does really that makes me happier on the inside knowing that there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, especially for those who are in critical care like that.
Yeah.
That's actually really comforting to know.
Hope, that's what it is. And
Yes.
that's definitely an excellent thing to have right now.
Fanciful Unicorn also asks, is there a way to know if you've already gotten it? I got really sick in February, and I am not sure if it was just a bad flu or maybe corona.
That's a really great question, and that's the question that everybody's asking. So there is a way to test it, but it's not super great yet, is unfortunately the answer. So the way they test it is something called serology testing, where they look in your blood. So whenever we fight off infections, our body sort of takes a picture of them and makes a memory and creates these things called antibodies that recognize that whatever infection we had and can fight it off for the future. And so what these serology tests are doing is looking to see if your body made antibodies. So if you had something and you fought it off, your body likely made antibodies against it. And so they're just looking for the presence of those antibodies. So there's about 150 of those tests out in the market. I think maybe one or two are actually worth anything. And so maybe we give it time and we'll see the better ones will stick around and you can get that test.
Huh. Very interesting. That popped a question in my head. I'll get to Stacy's after this one, but a small addendum. We've had recoveries
Yeah.
So a question I was asked is those recoveries, wouldn't they tend to have an antibody or something of residual that we can use as a means of finding a vaccine?
Brilliant. That is absolutely 100% right, and great thought right there. Those antibodies. So people are doing these trials of something called convalescent plasma, which is exactly that, taking the blood of
Wow.
people who have recovered and using it as a treatment. But what often happens when your body builds an antibody response to an infection, it creates like 50, 100 different types of antibodies against the virus. But not all of them are super optimized to destroy it. And the really best antibodies are the ones that can that can hold on to the virus in such a way that the virus can't infect new cells in your body. So that once it's in your blood, it'll bind onto it and it can't go anywhere else. And those are called neutralizing antibodies. So there are researchers at the Hutch that are looking for those specific neutralizing antibodies in recovered patients to see if they can find the right one so that we can use the right antibody for treatment and get a better response than just throwing a mix of stuff at people. And there's been some really promising findings there. And actually, two different people have two different sets of results that are really promising. One is the people that have found the good neutralizing antibodies that they could potentially think about use it to design vaccines or even use that antibody as a treatment. And the other is a group in Seattle that just did a test of kids who had gone to hospitals in all of April, looking for whether they had antibodies to the virus. And they found 10 kids had recovered from coronavirus and had antibodies in their blood. And kids are able to build a better, more robust, build more of those blocking antibodies or neutralizing antibodies than adults are. So there may be something about how kids fight it that we can use as well.
That is amazing. That is, oh man, that I hope we can get that in the VOD, because that right there alone would comfort so many people and stomp out a lot of the clickbaity stuff that the news puts out for sure. That's something I really
that
hope people
would.
start listening to.
And I think what's really good is right now this is fulfilling exactly what the purpose of this interview is to really help on informing, so that's really great to hear about.
Hey, science, there's good science going on. And, everything that you are doing and everything that everybody's doing by maintaining physical distance and wearing masks when they're in public, all you're doing is buying science time. And science thanks you for it. So we're all in this fight together. And thank you all for everything that you're doing.
Eventually, we'll get it.
Yeah.
One of these days. We have one other remaining question. It looks like Charlotte had also asked a supplementary question, but your response on that actually seemed to answer her question. So she was happy about that.
That is true. But yeah, I think I don't know how many more questions we can ask, but definitely indeed there is another question from Stacy asking, what's your stance on the herd immunity approach? Something that Sweden is going, for example. So she also said that if you're not comfortable answering that question, that's absolutely fine. But you do as you want.
Yeah.
What do you think?
That's a good question, right? Let's define herd immunity first. So what herd immunity is basically the idea that there's a large enough percentage of the population that has a resistance to the virus, either through vaccination or getting sick. And that means that if somebody who has the virus coughs on them, the virus can't find a hold or a home, and it won't be able to get transmitted to that person and therefore the next person and the next person. So herd immunity basically builds up a shield of people who cannot get the virus, so that even if you bump into somebody who's sick, the virus can't spread. We're limiting the number of ways that it can spread. Public health researchers believe that you need to have, I think I last read 60 to 70% of the population to have immunity to the virus to build up herd immunity. Wow. And that is a large number, especially when there's a virus that causes death at the rate of anywhere between 0.5% and 2%, depending on the demographics in the place. You're really putting a lot of strain on people. There's likely to be a lot of people who die if you're letting people get sick. And Sweden is not explicitly going for herd immunity. Let's be very clear on that. That's the government has not actually said that they're going for herd immunity. They're just a lot more open than their neighbors. And you can see it in the numbers. In Sweden, there's about, last I checked, there was about 30 deaths per 1,000 people, versus in Norway and Denmark, where it was between 4 and 9 deaths per 1,000 people. So it's multitudes less. And even Washington State, which is a comparable population to Sweden, we have 14 deaths per 1,000 people. The question of economy versus number of deaths is not something I want to answer. It's a tough question for anybody to have to think about.
Wow. I live here in America, so that I had no idea that was being a thing, but the answer you gave, that makes me myself as American kind of think, and I'm just at a loss of words. That's
yeah. And if you think about New York City, which was the worst hit place in the U.S., even New York City only has a prevalence of antibodies in 20% of the population. It's nowhere near herd immunity. And we already saw what it did to New York City. It decimated the place. I used to live in New York. I did my PhD there. I love that city. And it got decimated. And it's still only 20% of the population.
Wow. Well, we are running a little short on time here. We had chat ask one final question, and they were encouraging this one person's question. It's username TryCrow says, quote, I would be unsure if this is known, but at least in the UK, I know they don't report recovered cases, at least on Worldometer. Would you know of a reason for that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I have not looked in Worldometer. So disclosure there, I'm not sure whether they do or don't. But there are other resources where you can go to look at sick and recovered cases. Johns Hopkins has a really fantastic dashboard where you can go look at every country, the number of sick, the number of active cases, the number of recovered. But I'm not sure about Worldometer. So
you said John Hopkins would be like the best resource to check the statistics.
Yeah, Johns Hopkins has a dashboard where they are tabulating in lifetime. So Johns Hopkins has a great one, and the New York Times also. Well, I don't know about international. Let's stick with the Johns Hopkins dashboard for now. It's a really good one.
That sounds fair to me.
Sounds fair to me as well. Well, we're rapidly approaching our time for our next one, so I wanted to skip to our last end of our closing statements here. As a worker for Fred Hutch, what are some of your goals going forward, and will you consider interviewing in front of another online audience like this again in the future? And if so, is there any final remarks that you would like to say to the folks at home watching this right now?
Yeah, what I would like to say to the folks watching at home is thank you. Thank you for everything you do. Right now the world needs science, but what science needs is you. What science needs is you to keep doing the right thing and maintaining physical distance, to support research in any way you can, just like you're doing by joining the stream. And people who donate, thank you. And people who, are wearing masks. So thank you very much to all of you. You're buying the researchers valuable time, and I can tell you they're working as hard as anything to try and find treatments, cures, best practices to give the public the right information to make safe choices going forward. So thank you, all of you.
And thank you for putting your life on the line for making all this possible for us. So we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your research to talk with us. It's greatly appreciated.
And of course, I would love to chat with you two guys again whenever you want. or anybody else that wants good information. So
absolutely, if you're going to stick around in the Discord, we could definitely, if those who have not joined the Bingothon Discord, you are welcome to do so. He should still be around here to potentially respond to some questions you may have for as long as he's able to. And on behalf of Speedruns Live, we'd love to thank you for being part of our marathon stream, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me and letting me spout on for as long as I did.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything. And I also want to let you know that the chat is also sending you a lot of love right now. So yeah, it's a great idea actually that Pami had. Like since you're on Discord, because Guppy is on our Discord server. So if you've got any questions, maybe you can also talk to him there directly. We'll probably post a link down in the chat because it's really amazing to have such an opportunity. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's really amazing.
Awesome. Oh. Speaking of awesome upcoming things, if you want to continue to support Guppy in fighting this coronavirus, stick around because we got some more awesome games.
So I'm really glad. I'm really glad about it.
I'm grateful that you wanted the information, right? Like, there's a lot of people that don't. And so I definitely appreciate the chance. So.
It's so cool. Well, I got some other things I got to do. I hate to jump off quick. By the way, if you wanted my real name, I am Joseph.
Okay, that was a fantastic interview, to be honest. crazy. Thank you so much, Fred Hutch, for taking your time and talking to us and answering our questions. Some of them can be pretty obvious, but still, it's very important, I think, to spread the correct information because misinformation and myths and misconceptions are such a big problem of nowadays, the digital world. And it spreads so quickly, and we really, really need to fight it off to be able to help researchers and scientists do their job. Do you agree, Charlie?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's understandable that people get into a mind state of panic and they're looking for as much information as they can, and then they end up spreading misinformation or looking to unreliable sources. But it's just good to, calm down a little bit and just listen to the experts and think about things in a more, relaxed setting. And, we've got to take this very seriously, but at the same time, not to panic and to think logically about things I think is the best way forward.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's also really nice what Guppy said about, the development and the research that is currently going on, and so many organizations working on their own version of the vaccine. That really makes me hopeful.
Yeah. And also treatment, because as they say, it might take more than a year for a vaccine to be developed, but there's also ways of, shortening the time frame that people are sick or the severity of the sickness, which is also very important. We do actually have a few donations to read out quickly before we go to Ori and the Blind Forest. Should we go through them?
Yes, let's do that.
Yes. So I'll read the first two. So we have a $30 donation from Sad Frog saying, "I'm waiting for you."
Ooh.
Ooh.
That's kind of spooky.
Yeah. Pretty creepy.
Pretty
And
intense.
and then we have a $1 donation from Ghost Alchemist with no comment. Thank you so much for those donations.
And we also have $10 from Rainbows, please. And I think, let me check, that donation should definitely go to the Rainbow Miser for Ori. And yeah, I'm right. We actually have met both incentives for the upcoming run. So not only are we going to have the Rainbow Miser, but also never pick up sign during the run, meaning that runners will have a more difficult time completing the bingo, which is amazing. Thank you so much for all your donations. We have topped over the $100 milestone.
Just really fantastic. As we've said before, every single dollar helps. And yeah, we always love, seeing more donations that make the runners' lives more difficult. It's always fun to see people have fun, We mean it in jest, we don't like to, make them suffer. Maybe a little bit.
I mean, speedrunners surely do love challenge, and that's what we are giving them.
Exactly. We're just giving them what they want.
Okay, I think everyone's ready, so enjoy Ori and the Blind Forest, Definite Edition, Randomizer by Xemsis and Athos.